impacting on them. And when we say the high-stakes system, we mean the system whereby the assessment isn't really for the purposes of the children's learning, it's for the purposes of assessing whether teachers are doing what government thinks they should be doing, or Ofsted, which is our inspectorate, and whether the schools are at the level that the government thinks they should, again without really understanding the context. So whereas for you talk about the outsourcing, for us it's probably more at the moment more obvious that it's about the system of assessing schools that the government has imposed, which is really underlying all of this. 58% of teachers said that there was a really terrible impact on children who speak English as an additional language. So, and also there's the issue of summer-born children as opposed to children born later in the year. So 42% were concerned about summer-born children, because if say a 6-year-old is tested, depending on where they are in the year, they could be almost 5 up to almost 7. So the big difference in terms of the learning of those children. And then the third one, 33% of teachers said that the children eligible for free school meals, which is essentially poorer children, were really impacted negatively by the system of assessment that we have. So at a really young age, we see our assessment system as being really abusive to children. And what we've got in here is a number of quotes that our members have said about the impact of that, and about how it doesn't, and how it impacts on those who have difficulties at home as well. So children with issues at home really can't control how much credit they're given for learning. No matter how hard they work, they'll be affected by other issues at home, domestic violence, family breakup and things, so how unfair it is on them. And children being told at that age that they just are not good enough, we think is really problematic. So that's that document. This one, you talked about work with academics, and this document, and I'll send it electronically, is a pamphlet which is a network of academics and researchers, as well as some of people that work for our union, talking in a more academic sense about some of the problems. So again, it's about the mismeasurement of learning and how schools and teachers really need to take back control of assessment. We haven't got there. You're further down the line, but that's what we need to do. So this is a series of essays by various academics about various aspects of that. So dealing with the way that so much relates to data now. So teachers, both young people, are assessed according to scores on tests and tick boxes, but also teachers are. So teachers have to collect certain data about the attainment of their pupils, and whether they get a pay increase, whether they are potentially in capability processes, will depend on whether or not they meet the requirements in relation to the data from the tests. So it impacts both on the teachers, obviously, as well as the pupils. We've got an essay here about more about data, but about how that actually challenges teaching for early years and learning, and how detrimental it is. Data is really the thing for us at the moment, but there are also hints towards ways that we see it being done differently. So we've got some essays here about some of the arguments that we're thinking about. There's one here on phonics. The government some time ago decided that young people should only be taught to read in one particular way, and that was according to phonics. Even if it didn't suit the young person or the child, they had to be taught in that way, and teachers would be marked down if they didn't use exactly that system, completely taking away, again, the professional judgment and professional autonomy. So there's we think, some quite interesting arguments there about how we see it. But back to the issue about parents again, this document is a coalition of educationists but also parents groups who are concerned about what's happening to pupils, and that the group is called More Than a Score, seeing young people, pupils, learners, as more than just being about a score and what score they achieve. And in here a number of us have pointed towards how we think assessment should work. So in here we say we want assessment that supports children in their learning and, as you were saying, enables teachers to identify pupils' attainment and learning needs. And we want assessment that treats young people in the round as whole people. One thing that we found is that with funding problems at the same time, and with the curriculum being very much focused on English and maths in particular, lots of other subjects are disappearing from the curriculum. So there's no room for arts, there's no room for music and other things which obviously not only are good for all learners, but are those things which might excite and interest some children much more than other subjects and might make them much more welcoming of education and school. We want to keep them interested in school and excited by it. Wanting modes of assessment that's appropriate to development. Again, we think because the government and the ministers that we have in the government see themselves as knowing more about education than teachers, so they think they can decide what's the right way of assessing at any particular time, and they listen only to certain experts and not to everybody. So we have said very much that government ministers need not to be telling teachers how to teach. They need to be working out, giving us a framework within which we can teach, but not to be actually setting the curriculum quite as sort of in such a focused and limited way as they are. And also we want there to be a dialogue between teachers and parents, and I think we've only been successful in that with some groups of parents at the moment, but we do need to reach out much wider than that, much more widely, and that can sometimes be done through community groups and also faith groups and other organisations in the UK where groups and parents and communities come together to really see what they want for their children to have for the future and what skills and ambitions they want their children to have. And we also want to look at assessment as an assessment of the national education system, not necessarily of individual schools and individual pupils in the same way, in a sort of tested way, but for the government to take responsibility for saying we need to have the best education system that we can, and this is a better way of doing it. So one of our proposals has been that rather than there being individual tests for individual pupils at these levels, that there should be much more sample testing, because then it's more about not how well has that pupil done or how well has that teacher or school done. It's much more about, is the education service as a whole reaching the places that we want it to reach. So trying to move them from lots of testing to much more basis on summative and formative judgments, but judgments of teachers as opposed to judgments according to data, and also assessment of the system as a whole, because we're never going to get away from systems such as PISA and TALIS and those kinds of international testing systems, but to do that on a much more sampled basis, so that we take away the high stakes nature of it and we're actually looking at the system as a whole. So those are some of the proposals that we've made. Government's completely uninterested in that at the moment. We think that to make movement, in a way, just as you're saying, for us it's so linked in with the general political situation at the time. So we believe we've now got perhaps more leverage with the government because the outcome of the election wasn't as they hoped it would be. But we really need to change our government, really, in order to have those arguments about what teaching should look like, what should an education service for the future look like, what do young people need. So we're not affiliated to our Labour Party in the UK, but we work very closely with them. And so what we really want to do, I mean, we're obviously working on educational issues, but we also think we really, at the foundation, at the heart of all this, is a completely new approach from government, and that probably means a new government as well. So we're trying to deal with that at the same time and work very closely with the politicians on that. So thank you. I just wanted to sort of show you some of these documents, and I can send any other information, but I was just saying it would be really useful to have your slides as well,
Yeah.
because I'd like to talk with our international committee about the work that we do, and also our education committee, to say what you're doing and how many links there are between the two.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Amana. That was quite helpful, especially the essays by the academics, but also statement by parents, because clearly it is that the work that you are doing is to say unions must go back to the basics and go back to the communities. You need to reconnect with the communities if we are to deal with this onslaught on trade union movement globally. That's very critical indeed. I just then want to open up for general discussion. But also identify areas where we can be working together. As I have said, we have these long-standing relationship since our inception. NUT has been playing a very, very pivotal role. So we maintaining this relationship, but obviously there might be areas where we could be exchanging more experiences, but also supporting each other. Right, opening it up was quite insightful. Yeah.
No, thank you, Jess and Amanda. I think I would be very interested in looking at the tool that you use to do the survey. Get the information from your